Our planet is on the brink of another devastating world war. And while it's terrifying to imagine the realities this conflict could bring to people all over the world, this time it could play out on a battlefield unlike any other. Space. Which nations would be the main cosmic combatants? What kinds of never-before-seen weaponry would be used? And would it ever end? This is What If, and here's what would happen if World War III was fought in space. Before we launch into the cosmic battleground of World War III, let's take a look at the terrestrial tensions leading us to the brink of war. No matter when exactly the full-scale conflict would erupt, the stage has been set already for quite some time. Many of the geopolitical rivalries and alliances have already been compounding and could ignite beyond our atmosphere at any moment. A digital arms race for technological supremacy has been brewing between the US, China, and Russia. But this cyber warfare isn't the only realm where the most powerful nations on Earth have already been disputing. International agreements such as the Nuclear Forces Treaties are eroding. Climate change is turning the Arctic into a strategic military position, and nations are already developing all kinds of anti-satellite and other space-capable technologies. With the boundaries between Earth and space getting blurrier, this powder keg of international relations is about to blow right out of the atmosphere. If a violent international conflict erupted in the final frontier, would we even be able to call it a world war? Well, debating this name wouldn't be very helpful when the fight would be unfolding on entirely new dimensions. Okay, not literally in new dimensions, yet. The war would still be limited by our four-dimensional framework of space and time. That's not to say that even further in the future we could be fighting interdimensional wars. Let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves. The technologies of space warfare would be a leap beyond our current capabilities. The three most powerful nations, and others with advanced space programs like India, Japan, and the European Union, would need to accelerate the development of an entirely new arsenal of weapons. Satellites, old and new, would become active components of the various war machines. They could be reconfigured into highly sophisticated communications scramblers, anti-missile defense systems, or even high-energy laser beams. This could sound like science fiction, and it is, but it's only the beginning. Each of the warring nations would soon develop spacecraft to fight on battlegrounds beyond traditional orbits. These spacecraft could be both human-controlled and autonomous. But they'd likely resemble advanced fighter jets designed for intricate maneuvering in the vacuum of space. And they'd carry highly destructive weaponry to engage in short-range dogfights with enemy spaceships, as well as long-range laser weapons to attack targets back on Earth. Among some of the most terrifying new weapons that could wreak havoc and destruction on terrestrial targets would be the so-called rods from God. Now, all that stuff might sound like pure sci-fi, but I regret to inform you that these could be an actual real-life possibility. The rods from God would be dense, heavy rods made of tungsten that could be dropped from satellites down onto Earth. They would measure over 6 meters in length and weigh nearly 4.5 tons. Yeah, known as a kinetic bombardment rod, these weapons would accelerate to incredible speeds as they descend through the atmosphere. Upon impact, they'd carry the force of a nuclear weapon, but without any of the radioactive fallout. Entire cities could be wiped out with the press of a button. So, although this war is primarily fought in space, Earth could still suffer some serious consequences. But more on that in a bit. The concept for this radical weapon has been around since the aftermath of the Second World War. It was developed by a researcher for Boeing as a way to deliver devastating blows without the need for deploying nuclear weapons. In the battleground of space, weapons like these would be a game changer. And the satellites carrying these rods would be highly strategic targets to take out to avoid massive casualties from artificial meteor strikes. One of the most essential strategic sites in a war in space would be the biggest of all satellites in orbit, the Moon. This celestial body would be a highly disputed territory for establishing bases. It would also be home to artillery and research and development laboratories to forge new weapons. It could even be a battlefield of its own as different countries attack each other's bases or lead ground invasions through the rocky landscapes. The meaning of one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind would take on entirely new interpretations in this dangerous war zone. With all the conflict erupting in space, the borders of the battle could continually expand as newer and more capable technologies develop. Eventually, the struggle could lead to a deadly conflict over Mars, the asteroid belt, or beyond. The repercussions for this war on Earthly civilians would also be severe. The wide destruction of satellites would lead to a global breakdown of communications, navigation systems, and weather prediction technology. Economies would be devastated as all kinds of trade agreements would fall apart. And the budgets of all the world's most powerful nations would go almost exclusively to further advancements in the space military-industrial complexes. And while the battles would rage off the surface of the planet, there'd be no escape from the new reality of war. Every night, as you watch the stars, you'd catch glimpses of orbital bombardments easily visible to the naked eye. Now, you could be wondering, just how far would World War III in space go? And just how would it ever end? Well, at this moment, that's impossible to say, but you could certainly imagine that this kind of war would be almost entirely unpredictable. It would no longer be about taking over pieces of land on Earth. It would be about who could conquer the vastness of space. What would begin with satellite crossfire could evolve to the construction of massive space stations that serve as bases for a new era of deep space exploration and conflict. And to take things even further, who's to say it would ever end at all? Or maybe it wouldn't be humans, but another advanced alien civilization that would swoop in and diplomatically end the conflict. And if that were to happen, well, let's hope we don't get too carried away and find ourselves at war with other species from faraway planets. But now that makes me wonder, if aliens arrived tomorrow, could that possibly prevent this whole world war in the first place? Well, that sounds like a story for another What If.